The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. A sleek glass table separated Pascal and Toulouse, but the real distance between them was much greater, built over years of resentment, unspoken words, and silent suffering. The air smelled of fresh coffee and expensive cologne, yet it felt suffocating. Pascal sat back in his leather chair, his fingers drumming against the divorce papers in front of him. He had rehearsed this moment in his head, imagining the scene unfolding in a predictable way. Toulouse would cry, she would fall to her knees, she would beg. He would pretend to hesitate, enjoying his power over her for just a little longer before granting her mercy. But reality had a different plan. Toulouse sat across from him, her expression unreadable. Her dark brown eyes studied the papers with an eerie calmness. If Pascal didn't know any better, he would have thought she was looking at an ordinary grocery list, not the document that would officially end their 5-year marriage. Well? Pascal broke the silence, leaning forward. Say something. Toulouse finally looked up, her lips curling into a small, almost amused smile. She picked up the pen beside the papers, rolled it between her fingers, and then, in a voice as steady as the ocean, said, "Thank you." Pascal stiffened. His chest tightened. What? This was not how she was supposed to react. Where were the tears? The desperation? The pleading? She was supposed to remind him of all they had been through, try to make him change his mind. Instead, she had just thanked him? Pascal forced out a dry chuckle, though a hint of unease crept into his voice. You don't understand, Toulouse. I'm leaving you. You should be devastated right now. Toulouse exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding her breath for years and was finally allowed to release it. Oh, I understand, Pascal. More than you think. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You think I'd beg you to stay? After everything? Her words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain calm. You should be grateful, you know, he muttered, grasping at his old tactic of control. If it weren't for me, you'd still be in that wretched one-room apartment, struggling to feed yourself. Toulouse let out a soft laugh. Not bitter, not angry, just amused. It sent a chill down Pascal's spine. Is that what you still believe? She asked, tilting her head. That I'm helpless without you? Pascal felt something shift in the air between them. For years, he had been the one in control, the one with power, the one who spoke while Toulouse listened. But now it felt like she was seeing him for what he truly was. A scared, insecure man hiding behind his wealth and arrogance. He pushed the divorce papers toward her. Just sign it, Toulouse. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Toulouse took the pen in her hand. She clicked it once, twice, then placed it back down. I'll sign, she said, but on my terms. Pascal narrowed his eyes. Your terms? Toulouse stood up, smoothing out her dress. She glanced around the luxurious living room, taking in the expensive furniture, the crystal chandelier, the Persian rug that Pascal had always bragged about. Yes, she said, because you don't get to dictate my life anymore. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Pascal staring after her, a strange knot forming in his chest. For the first time in his life, he was afraid. Pascal Adams was a man who always got what he wanted. Born into wealth, he had never known struggle. His father was a respected businessman, his mother a socialite who spent her days attending charity galas and high-profile luncheons. Pascal had been raised to believe that money was power, and that power meant control. He lived by that philosophy in business, in friendships, and especially in relationships. And that was exactly why he had chosen Toulouse. The first time he saw her, she was balancing a tray of drinks at a small restaurant in Iseloro, a modest neighborhood in the city. She had been wearing a faded blue dress and cheap slippers, her hair neatly tied back. He had watched her move, graceful, reserved, and completely unaware of the attention she drew. She was different from the women in his world. Women who spoke too loudly, laughed too freely, and demanded too much. Toulouse had been quiet, almost timid, and he liked that. She wouldn't challenge him. She wouldn't talk back. She would be easy to control. Pascal had made his move quickly. He became a frequent customer at the restaurant, always sitting at the corner table, always asking for Talou to serve him. At first, she had been cautious, her responses polite but distant. But Pascal knew how to wear people down. He started leaving her generous tips, then began casual conversations. He told her about his businesses, his expensive lifestyle, the places he had traveled. He noticed the way her eyes lit up when he mentioned things she had never seen. High-rise buildings, private jets, luxury hotels. Then one evening, he made her an offer. "I could take care of you, you know," he had said, his voice smooth and confident. "You wouldn't have to work here anymore." Talou had blinked at him, her tray held tightly in her hands. "I don't understand." Pascal leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Marry me." She had laughed at first, thinking he was joking. But when she saw the seriousness in his eyes, her smile faded. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Pascal replied. "I know you're struggling. I know you deserve better. I can give you a life you never even dreamed of." It was a fairy tale offer, and Talou, tired of the life she had known, tired of struggling, had said yes. The wedding was a grand affair. Pascal spared no expense, making sure everything was lavish enough to impress his social circle. Talou wore a designer gown, her makeup flawless, her smile bright. Though, deep down, she felt like a guest at her own wedding. She convinced herself it was just nerves. That once they were settled into married life, she would learn to love him. But the first cracks appeared on their honeymoon. They had traveled to Cape Town, staying at a five-star resort overlooking the ocean. On their second night, Talou had made the mistake of suggesting they go out to explore the city. Pascal had laughed, a sharp, condescending sound. "You don't need to see anything, Talou. This place is better than anything you've ever known." She had laughed along, pretending it didn't sting. It was the first of many moments where Pascal made her feel small. At first, she brushed it off, telling herself he was just being playful. But as the weeks turned into months, the comments became sharper, the condescension more obvious. "You're lucky I married you. You wouldn't survive without me. You should be grateful, Talou." And each time, she swallowed her pride, convinced herself that this was love, that this was what marriage was supposed to be. But deep inside, something in her was shifting, a quiet, simmering rebellion. And soon, Pascal would regret everything. Talou had imagined marriage would be different. She had envisioned a partnership, two people growing together, supporting each other. She had believed Pascal's promises of love, of a better life. But it didn't take long for her to realize that the only thing he had truly given her was a gilded cage. At first, it was subtle. "You don't need to work," Pascal had said one morning, sipping his imported black coffee as he read the business section of the newspaper. "A wife of Pascal Adams doesn't need to earn money. That's my job." Talou had hesitated. "I like working." Pascal had glanced up, a smirk playing on his lips. "Working? At that rundown restaurant?" "Talou, be serious. You have everything now. Just enjoy it." It sounded like a gift, a luxury. But in reality, it was a leash. Pascal made sure she had no reason to step outside his world. He filled their home with maids, chefs, and drivers, ensuring she never needed to lift a finger. He gave her credit cards with no limits, but they came with an unspoken rule. Every purchase she made was his to approve. "You don't need friends," he had said once, when she mentioned visiting Funk, an old colleague from the restaurant. "They'll only remind you of your old life. And that life is beneath you now." Slowly, her world shrank. At first, Talou had tried to make the best of it. She decorated their house, planned dinners, played the role of the perfect wife. She convinced herself that Pascal's control was just his way of caring for her. But then came the insults. Casual, offhand remarks that stung more than she would ever admit. "If it weren't for me, you'd still be eating bread and sardines for dinner. You should be grateful, Talou. Do you know how many women would kill to be in your position?" She forced smiles. She nodded. She agreed. But inside, she was suffocating. Then, one evening, at a business dinner, the humiliation reached a new level. Pascal had invited her to an exclusive event, an elite gathering of wealthy businessmen and their wives. It was her first time attending one of his social functions, and she had spent the whole afternoon preparing. She chose a simple but elegant black dress, styled her hair in soft curls, and applied light makeup. She wanted to make him proud. But from the moment they arrived, Pascal ignored her. He mingled with his friends, laughing and clinking glasses, while she stood awkwardly at his side, feeling invisible. Then, during dinner, someone asked about how they met. Pascal chuckled, swirling the wine in his glass. "I plucked her out of poverty," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "You should have seen where she used to live. One room, barely any furniture. I saved her." The table erupted in laughter. Toulou's hands trembled under the table. Her face burned with shame, but she forced a smile, pretending it didn't hurt. Pascal draped an arm around her shoulder, oblivious to her pain. "Isn't that right, sweetheart?" he asked, grinning. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes," she whispered, because what else could she say? That night, as Pascal slept soundly beside her, Toulou lay awake staring at the ceiling. The humiliation replayed in her mind over and over. The laughter, the mockery, the way Pascal had spoken about her as if she were a stray dog he had adopted. Something shifted inside her. She had spent years being grateful. Grateful for the food, the clothes, the house. Grateful for Pascal. But that gratitude had cost her everything. Her dignity, her independence, her voice. No more. Toulou turned to look at Pascal, his chest rising and falling in deep sleep. He thought he had one. He thought she would always remain under his control. But he had no idea that the woman lying beside him was no longer the same woman he had married. And soon, he would regret everything. Toulou did not wake up the next morning as the same woman Pascal had grown used to. She still made his breakfast. She still kissed his cheek as he left for work. She still played her role as the perfect, obedient wife. But inside, something had shifted. She was no longer grateful. For years, she had swallowed every insult, every humiliation, every reminder that Pascal believed he owned her. But that night at the business dinner had changed everything. She had seen herself through his eyes, a trophy, a project, a woman who should always be thankful. That image shattered something inside her. So, she began planning. Not an escape. Not yet. Pascal was too controlling for that. If she suddenly packed a bag and left, he would come after her. He would track her down, drag her back, and make her life a living hell. No, she had to be smart. She had to be patient. She had to build her freedom in silence. A secret investment. Toulou had always been good with money. Before Pascal, she had learned how to stretch every naira, how to survive on little. And even though Pascal provided for everything, she had managed to save small amounts over the years. Tips from the restaurant, cash gifts from extended family, leftover allowances Pascal never bothered to check. It wasn't much, but it was a start. So, one afternoon, under the guise of going to the salon, she took a taxi to a small co-working space on the outskirts of the city. A place Pascal would never think to look for her. There, she met Funmi. Funmi was a self-made businesswoman, a woman Toulou had admired from afar. They had met through a mutual friend months ago, and Toulou had always been drawn to her confidence. The way she spoke, the way she carried herself like she owed no one an apology. "You want to start an online business?" Funmi asked, raising a brow as she sipped her coffee. Toulou nodded. "I don't just want to. I need to." Funmi studied her for a long moment before leaning forward. "Does Pascal know?" Toulou shook her head. "And he can't. Not yet." A slow smile spread across Funmi's face. "I like you, Toulou. You're quiet, but there's fire in you. Let's get to work." The birth of Ada Creations. With Funmi's guidance, Toulou started an online fashion business. She used a fake name, Ada Creations, to hide her identity. She invested her small savings in buying materials, outsourcing designs, and slowly building a brand on social media. At first, it was slow. Orders trickled in. But Toulou was patient. She responded to every message, packaged every order herself, and delivered them discreetly. She worked in silence. She smiled when Pascal mocked her, when he told his friends that his wife didn't have to worry about petty things like making money. He had no idea that every time he left the house, she was running a business right under his nose. A business that was growing. a hidden bank account. The first time she received a significant payment, Nigerian Naira 200,000 for a bulk order, Tolu felt something she hadn't felt in years. Power. It wasn't Pascal's money. It wasn't something she had to ask permission to use. It was hers. She opened a separate bank account under her business name. Pascal monitored their joint account closely, but this one, he would never know about it. For the first time in years, she had something that belonged to her. Something that couldn't be taken away. The test of loyalty. One evening, Pascal came home in a foul mood. Business had been rough, and he was looking for someone, to take it out on. Tolu was in the kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone, responding to customers, when Pascal grabbed the device from her hands. "What are you always doing on this phone?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you talking to?" Tolu's heart pounded, but she forced a smile. "Just looking at fashion pages. I get bored sometimes." Pascal scoffed, tossing the phone onto the counter. "As if you have anything better to do." He walked away without another word, and Tolu exhaled shakily. She had passed the test. He still saw her as the quiet, obedient wife. But one day soon, he would realize the truth. She was no longer the woman he controlled. And by the time he figured it out, it would be too late. Tolu had learned the art of deception. She played her role well, the quiet wife, the grateful woman, the obedient partner. She nodded when Pascal spoke, smiled when he mocked her, and never questioned his authority. But behind the mask, she was building her own empire. Her business, Ada Creations, was growing. She had moved from selling simple clothing pieces to handling custom orders for high-profile clients, businesswomen, celebrities, and socialites who appreciated her designs. Every naira she earned went straight into her secret account, untouched by Pascal's hands. But no matter how careful she was, cracks were starting to show, and Pascal was beginning to notice. A question too close. One evening, over dinner, Pascal studied Tolu with a look she had come to recognize. Curiosity mixed with suspicion. "You've been looking different lately," he mused, slicing into his steak. Tolu's fingers tightened around her fork. "Different how?" Pascal shrugged. "I don't know. More confident. Almost like you have a secret." Her heartbeat quickened. She forced a laugh. "A secret? What secret would I have?" Pascal smirked. "Exactly." He reached for his wine glass. "You have no business outside of me, Tolu. I give you everything you need. So, if I ever find out you're hiding something from me..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. The warning was clear. Tolu swallowed the lump in her throat, plastering a smile on her face. "There's nothing to find out, Pascal. For now." An unexpected encounter. A week later, Tolu took a calculated risk. She had been invited to an exclusive women's business networking event. It was a chance to connect with more clients, to expand her reach. But attending meant lying to Pascal, something she had never dared to do before. She told him she was visiting her mother. He barely looked up from his phone. "Fine, but don't stay too long." Tolu exhaled in relief and quickly left before he could change his mind. The event was everything she had hoped for. Powerful women shared ideas, exchanged contacts, and supported each other. Ada Creations gained new clients that night, and for the first time, Tolu felt like she truly belonged. Then came the problem. As she was leaving, she bumped into someone she hadn't seen in years, Kelvin. Kelvin had been her first love. Back when life was simple, back when she had dreams beyond marriage. He had wanted to build a future with her, but Tolu had chosen security, chosen Pascal. And now, Kelvin stood before her, looking more successful than ever. "Tolu?" His voice was laced with shock. She swallowed hard. "Kelvin, I can't believe this," he said, stepping closer. "You look different." There it was again, that word. Different. She forced a smile. "It's been a long time." Kelvin nodded, his gaze searching hers. "Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, she considered lying, saying yes, saying Pascal had given her everything. But the words wouldn't come. Kelvin's expression softened. "You deserve more, Tolu." Her throat tightened. "I should go." But as she turned to leave, Kelvin gently grabbed her wrist. "If you ever need anything, Even just a friend. I'm here. She wanted to pull away, to tell him she was fine, but her fingers tightened around his card instead. A dangerous game. That night, as she lay beside Pascal, Kelvin's words haunted her. You deserve more. She had spent years convincing herself that this was her fate, that Pascal's control was normal, that she had no choice. But now, she wasn't so sure. For the first time in a long time, she had options. She had power. And soon, Pascal would realize that he was no longer the one pulling the strings. By the time he figured it out, it would be too late. Toulouse had always known how to move carefully around Pascal, but after running into Kelvin, a strange feeling lingered inside her, the feeling of possibility. For years, she had accepted her life as Pascal's wife, thinking she had no way out. But now, she wasn't so sure. Kelvin's words had planted a dangerous seed in her mind. You deserve more, Toulouse. For the first time, she was starting to believe it. A suspicious husband. Pascal had never been the type to pay close attention to Toulouse's routine. As long as she was home when he wanted, available when he needed, and obedient when he commanded, he didn't care what she did in between. But something had changed. He began watching her more closely. His eyes lingered when she picked up her phone. He asked more questions. And one evening, he finally voiced his suspicion. You've been acting different, he said, sipping his drink as he lounged on the sofa. Toulouse kept her face neutral. What do you mean? You dress up even when you're not going anywhere. You smile at your phone a lot. And that night you went to your mother's place. I called her. Toulouse froze. Pascal tilted his head, his smirk sharp. She said she hadn't seen you in weeks. Her mind raced, but she kept her voice calm. I stopped by a store first. Maybe I lost track of time. Pascal set his glass down, his expression unreadable. Are you lying to me? Toulouse met his gaze. Of course not. He stared at her for a long time before chuckling. Good. Because if I ever find out you're lying. He leaned forward, brushing a hand against her cheek, but his touch was ice cold. You know what I'm capable of. A threat. Toulouse swallowed the fear rising in her chest and forced a smile. There's nothing to find out, Pascal. But she knew then, Pascal was starting to doubt her. A step too far. Toulouse knew she had to be more careful. She started limiting how often she checked her business messages at home, making sure Pascal never saw her working. She avoided taking long calls. But one day, she made a mistake. She had received a bulk order, one of the biggest her business had ever had. It required urgent attention, so she stole a moment in the study to finalize details with the supplier. She was so focused on the conversation that she didn't hear Pascal walk in. Toulouse. Her blood ran cold. Slowly, she turned to face him, her phone still in her hand. His eyes narrowed. Who were you talking to? She hesitated. Just a friend. Pascal stepped closer, his presence towering over her. A friend? His voice was soft, but the threat was clear. Which friend? Toulouse knew one wrong word could set him off. So, she chose silence. Pascal's jaw tightened. Without warning, he grabbed the phone from her hand and glanced at the screen. His expression darkened. What is this? He demanded. Toulouse's heart pounded. It's nothing. Who is Ada Creations? His voice was sharp now. Why are you receiving payments? Her secret was out. Toulouse braced herself for the storm. The breaking point. Pascal's fury was like a fire that couldn't be contained. You've been working behind my back? He roared, pacing the room. You, my wife, running a business like some common market woman? Toulouse clenched her fists. There's nothing wrong with having my own money, Pascal. There is when you're my wife. He turned to her, his face twisted in anger. I have given you everything. You don't need to work. Toulouse took a deep breath. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The moment she had been preparing for. You didn't give me a life, Pascal. You gave me a cage, she said, her voice steady. And I refuse to stay in it any longer. For the first time, Pascal looked truly shocked. You think you can leave me? He scoffed, stepping closer. You are nothing without me, Toulouse. You wouldn't survive a day on your own. Toulouse lifted her chin. I've already been surviving without you. Pascal's eyes darkened. And then, Just as she expected, he made his move. With a smirk, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded envelope, and tossed it onto the table. Fine, he said coldly. If you think you're so independent, sign these. Talu's breath hitched as she stared at the papers in front of her. Divorce papers. Pascal crossed his arms, waiting. He expected her to panic, to beg, to cry. But instead, Talu did something he never could have predicted. She smiled. The game has just begun. Pascal's smirk faltered. What's so funny? Talu picked up the papers, skimming through them. Then, with the same calmness she had perfected over the years, she set them down and met his gaze. Nothing, she said. I just didn't expect you to make things so easy for me. Pascal's face twisted in confusion. What? Talu stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. You thought I would cry, didn't you? That I would fall to my knees and beg you to stay? She let out a quiet laugh. Pascal, you've already lost me. For the first time, fear flashed in his eyes. Because he finally realized he wasn't the one in control anymore. And for the first time in his life, Pascal Adams didn't know what to do. Pascal had always prided himself on control. He controlled his businesses, his employees, and most importantly, his wife. But now, Talu stood in front of him, calm, steady, unreadable. Not the timid woman he had married. Not the desperate, grateful girl he had once rescued from poverty. She was something else now. Something dangerous. And he didn't like it. A miscalculation. Pascal had expected Talu to beg. He had imagined the tears, the pleas, the desperate attempts to hold on to their marriage. He had wanted to see her broken, to hear her say she couldn't live without him. Instead, she was smiling. She picked up the divorce papers again, flipping through them with an almost amused expression. Why now, Pascal? She asked finally. Why divorce me all of a sudden? Pascal scoffed, masking his unease. You disrespected me. By working? By going behind my back, he snapped. A wife of Pascal Adams has no business making money. I take care of you. Talu hummed, shaking her head. You control me, Pascal. There's a difference. His jaw clenched. So what? You think you're free now? You think you can leave me and suddenly become a powerful businesswoman? He stepped closer, his voice lowering. You are nothing without me, Talu. I made you. Talu finally looked up, meeting his gaze head-on. No, Pascal, she said, her voice steady. You only thought you made me. For the first time, he felt it, real fear. Because for the first time in their marriage, Pascal wasn't sure he was going to win. The clause. Pascal forced a smirk, masking his discomfort. Fine, he said, tapping the papers. If you're so confident, sign them. Talu exhaled, picked up a pen, and was about to sign when something caught her eye. A clause. A single paragraph buried in the fine print. Slowly, she read it. And then, for the first time, her expression darkened. Pascal smirked. Got her. You didn't think I'd make it that easy, did you? He drawled, stepping closer. You want to leave me? Fine. But you walk away with nothing. Talu's stomach turned, but she kept her face blank. The clause stated that if she agreed to the divorce on Pascal's terms, she forfeited all rights to their assets, including the house, the cars, and any financial benefits. He was trying to strip her bare, trying to send her back to the poverty she had once escaped. You planned this, she whispered, realization dawning. Pascal chuckled. Of course I did. You think I'd let you walk away comfortably? No, Talu. If you leave me, you leave with nothing. She clenched the pin tighter. Pascal leaned in, his voice dripping with arrogance. Go ahead, he murmured. Sign it. Let's see how strong you really are when you have nothing. Checkmate. Silence stretched between them. Then, Talu did something Pascal didn't expect. She placed the pin down, and she laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a forced one. A real, genuine, amused laugh. Pascal frowned. What the hell is funny? Talu wiped a tear from her eye, shaking her head. Pascal, you're a fool. His face darkened. What did you just say? You think this is a game where only you know the rules? She leaned forward, matching his energy. You think I'd be stupid enough to leave myself with nothing? Pascal's smirk faltered. Talou straightened, crossing her arms. I know you, Pascal. I knew you'd try to trap me. So I prepared. Pascal stiffened. What the hell are you talking about? Talou smirked. She walked to the cabinet, pulled out a folder, and tossed it onto the table. Pascal hesitated, then picked it up. The moment he saw the contents, his blood ran cold. It was proof. Proof of his hidden affairs. Proof of shady business deals he had conducted under the table. Proof of money laundering, fraudulent contracts, and even hush money sent to mistresses. Talou had been watching him, collecting evidence, for years. You, Pascal's voice was barely a whisper. You were spying on me? Talou shrugged. I was protecting myself. Pascal's hands tightened around the papers, his entire body vibrating with rage. You think this means anything? You think you can use this against me? Talou leaned in, her voice soft but sharp as a knife. If you try to take everything from me, Pascal, I will destroy you. Pascal stared at her, his mind racing. If this information got out, he wouldn't just lose money. He wouldn't just lose his reputation. He could lose everything. Talou saw the realization dawn on his face. And for the first time since she had met him, Pascal looked powerless. She leaned back, crossing her arms. So, she said smoothly, are you sure you want me to sign those papers? Pascal's throat bobbed, because suddenly, he wasn't so sure anymore. Pascal had spent years believing he was untouchable. As a wealthy businessman, the world bent to his will. Money and influence made him powerful, and Talou, in his eyes, had always been just another possession to control. But now, faced with the evidence in front of him, he was realizing for the first time that he had underestimated his wife. Talou wasn't the naive, grateful girl he had married. She had become a woman who knew her worth, and who knew how to play the game better than he ever could. The realization hit him harder than any insult he had ever faced. He was in a corner, and Talou was holding all the cards. A dangerous silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of the papers on the table. Pascal's mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Talou stood, her arms crossed in front of her, waiting, watching. She had no need to say more. Her silence spoke volumes. Finally, Pascal broke the tension with a scoff, but it was weak, almost hollow. You think this is over? He spat, trying to regain control. You think you can just threaten me and walk away with everything? Talou met his gaze with an icy calmness. If you push me, Pascal, I'll make sure you regret it. He sneered, a fake laugh escaping him. You think I'm afraid of a woman who's too scared to leave me? Who thinks she can threaten me with this? You don't have the guts, Talou. But there was something in her eyes, something fierce. For the first time, he saw the woman who had been buried beneath years of abuse. The woman he had belittled and controlled was finally emerging, unshackled and unafraid. Pascal's smirk faltered. You don't scare me, Talou. Talou leaned forward slowly, speaking with a calm that sent a chill down his spine. No, Pascal. What scares you is the thought that I might just walk away from you and leave you with nothing. Pascal's jaw tightened, but his eyes flickered nervously to the papers again. You wouldn't, he said in a near whisper. Talou gave him a knowing look. I don't need you, Pascal. I don't need your money, your power, or your approval. I've made my own way. The power dynamic had shifted. Pascal could feel it in the air, thick with tension and uncertainty. For the first time, he was no longer the one in control. A bargaining chip, Pascal struggled to keep his composure. You think your little documents will scare me? You think that will make me crumble? Talou smiled, but it was not a smile of amusement. It was a smile of calculated confidence. Pascal, I don't need to make you crumble. I just need you to understand that you're not invincible. He eyed her, his mind whirling. So what? You'll destroy me? You'll ruin everything I've built? Talou's smile faded, and her voice dropped to a low, dangerous tone. I don't want to ruin you, Pascal. I just want to make sure you don't ruin me. He swallowed, the weight of her words settling in. So, what is it you want from me, Talou? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. Everything? Pascal blinked, confused. Everything? You'll leave me with my business. You'll stop trying to control me. You'll stop trying to dictate my life. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but firm. And you'll stop telling me I owe you anything. Pascal couldn't believe what he was hearing. You think I'll just roll over and give you everything? Talou shook her head. No, Pascal. I think you'll realize that if you don't, I'll make sure your empire falls apart. I have enough leverage to bring you down. He met her gaze, and for the first time, he saw something he had never seen before. Real fear. It wasn't just about the divorce papers. It wasn't just about the financial loss. It was about losing his power, his reputation, his carefully constructed life. And that was something Pascal Adams could not afford. The bargain. Pascal's hands trembled as he slowly set the papers down. His gaze flickered over them, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Talou's silence spoke louder than any threat. She wasn't bluffing. He knew that now. Fine, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. You want your freedom? Talou didn't respond immediately, as if testing his sincerity. I'll give it to you, Pascal continued, his voice hardening. But you will never, ever challenge me again. Talou's lips parted, ready to speak, but she held back. She had no intention of letting him win this. Not fully. You will leave this marriage with your dignity intact, Pascal, she said, her voice low and firm. But you will never control me again. Pascal nodded reluctantly. And you'll stop all of this? He gestured to the documents, her evidence, her threats. Talou gave him a small nod. I'll stop, if you agree to my terms. Deal, he said quickly, though his eyes betrayed his hesitation. The tension in the room was palpable as Talou stood up, taking the papers and signing them without a second thought. Pascal stood silently as she handed the papers back to him. His empire, his power, his pride, all on the line. And yet, for the first time, Pascal felt like he was losing. The first step to freedom. Talou left the room, her heart racing but her mind clear. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time in a long while, she was free. And as she walked through the door, leaving Pascal in the room behind her, she couldn't help but smile. This was her new beginning, and there was no turning back. Talou walked out of the room, her hand trembling slightly as she closed the door behind her. It wasn't a victory, at least, not yet, but for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. She had done it. She had taken the first step to reclaiming her life. As she stepped out into the cool night air of Lagos, she felt the weight of her decision settle over her. Pascal had agreed to her terms, but it wasn't the end. The war was far from over. This was just the beginning of something bigger. She had outsmarted him this time, but she knew Pascal wouldn't give up so easily. He never did. A warning. The next few days were a blur. Talou busied herself with the details of the divorce. She consulted with lawyers, reviewed her financials, and began making plans for her future. It was overwhelming, but it was also liberating. She had been shackled for so long, it was almost difficult to remember what it felt like to be free. But despite all the progress, she knew one thing for sure. Pascal wasn't going to let her go quietly. He hadn't said much since their confrontation, but Talou could feel the storm brewing. His silence was more dangerous than any of his threats. And then, a week after the divorce papers had been signed, Talou received a message. It was from one of Pascal's associates, a man named Adebayo, someone she had met only briefly at business meetings. The message was simple but chilling. You need to be careful, Talou. Pascal is not done with you. No further explanation, no other details, just those words. Talou stared at the message for several moments, her heart racing. She knew Pascal. She knew how far he was willing to go to protect his image and his power. If Adebayo was warning her, it was serious. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she picked up the phone and called her lawyer. I need to know everything about Pascal's businesses, she said, her voice steady but urgent. Everything. Her lawyer hesitated, then agreed. I'll have my team gather all the information. But be careful, Talou. Pascal is not someone to underestimate. I know, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. The walls in her apartment suddenly felt like they were closing in. The shifting game. As the days passed, Pascal's presence seemed to loom larger in her life. Despite the divorce, his influence was everywhere. Talou continued to move forward, though, keeping her focus sharp. She was preparing herself for whatever he was going to throw her way. Her first move was to look deeper into his business dealings. If she was going to protect herself, she needed to know exactly what kind of empire he had built, and where his weaknesses lay. To her surprise, she found something. Pascal's business empire was vast, but it wasn't as clean as it appeared. She uncovered shady investments, risky partnerships, and several contracts that could easily be exposed as fraudulent. She had always known that Pascal operated in the gray areas, but now, she had the proof. She wasn't just going to survive this, she was going to bring him down. The turning point. One afternoon, as Talou was poring over the documents, she received a call. It was Adebayo. I told you to be careful, he said, his voice low. Pascal has people everywhere. He's already made a move. Talou's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? You've been digging into his businesses, Adebayo said, and now he knows. He's going to make sure you regret it. Talou felt a chill run down her spine. How do you know this? Adebayo hesitated. I have a contact in Pascal's office. They're talking about moving against you. Against me? She repeated, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. What does he plan to do? I don't know all the details yet, but I've heard whispers about legal action, threats to your reputation, even worse. Talou's mind raced. She had expected Pascal to retaliate, but she hadn't anticipated something this drastic. Thank you for the warning, she said, her voice steely. But I won't back down. Adebayo was silent for a moment. I hope you know what you're doing, Talou. I know exactly what I'm doing. With that, she hung up the phone, her resolve hardening. The long road ahead. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure mounted. Pascal's legal team began sending her letters, threatening to sue for defamation and claiming she had breached the confidentiality clauses of their prenuptial agreement. But Talou was prepared. She had already gathered all the evidence she needed to counter their claims. And with the legal advice she had been receiving, she was confident that Pascal's threats wouldn't hold up in court. But it wasn't just about the legal battle anymore. Talou's world was shifting in ways she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom. She was fighting for her future, her identity. The thought of backing down, of letting Pascal regain control, made her stomach turn. She had come too far to stop now. And even though the road ahead would be long, even though she knew the fight would only grow more intense, Talou felt something she hadn't in years. She felt alive. Every decision, every risk, every step she took from this moment forward would be hers, and hers alone. Pascal may have thought he could break her, but what he didn't realize was that he had only created a force stronger than he could ever imagine. As she sat at her desk, looking at the stacks of documents, Talou knew this was just the beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. The days seemed to blur together as Talou continued to prepare for the battle ahead. The world outside felt like it was moving too fast, but she was focused, determined. She had been married to Pascal for years, and now, she was about to step into the unknown. She'd learned the hard way that her strength didn't lie in passive waiting. It was in taking action, and she was ready. The legal games. Her lawyer, Diana, had become a valuable ally. They had spent hours together, going over Pascal's past legal cases and business dealings. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. Pascal wasn't invincible. Talou wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was going on the offensive. Everything you found is solid, Talou, Diana said one afternoon, her tone steady but with an undercurrent of excitement. We've got him cornered. Talou's heart raced, but she remained composed. I don't just want him cornered. I want him to know I'm not backing down. I've been silent for far too long. Diana smiled. That's the spirit. But we need to be careful. Pascal has resources, and he won't take this lying down. Talou nodded, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. I know. That's why we need to hit him where it hurts. Pascal's pride, his reputation, was everything to him. If she could chip away at that, she knew it would cause him more pain than anything else. Let's go after his public image first, Talou suggested. We start by leaking some of his questionable dealings to the press. Diana raised an eyebrow. Are you sure you want to go this route? The media attention could be overwhelming. Talou didn't hesitate. I've spent years living in his shadow, hiding behind his wealth. It's time for him to feel the same pressure I did. The media frenzy. The following week, the news was abuzz. A reputable journalist, one known for investigating corporate corruption, published a damning article detailing some of Pascal's questionable investments. The report highlighted his links to illegal financial dealings, as well as his shady partnerships. It was everything Talou had uncovered, and more. She watched the reaction unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. The public was shocked. Pascal had always been known as a successful, untouchable businessman. To see him exposed was a blow to his ego that no amount of wealth could fix. But Pascal didn't crumble. Instead, he went on the attack, denying everything and accusing Talou of fabricating the story to ruin him. He called her a liar, a gold digger, someone who was trying to destroy everything he had worked for. The media frenzy only intensified. Talou's name was now everywhere, linked to scandals, accusations, and threats. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel scared. She felt empowered. The retaliation. It didn't take long for Pascal to retaliate. Late one evening, as Talou sat in her apartment, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. Talou answered, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. You think you can win, Talou? Pascal's voice was low, his words laced with venom. You've made a huge mistake. Talou's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't show any fear. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Pascal. That's where you're wrong, he said, his voice cold. I'll make sure you regret this. I'll make sure you never see a penny from our divorce. You'll have nothing. I'll destroy you, Talou. You can't fight me. Talou gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. You're wrong. You've already lost. I'm done hiding. I'm done being your punching bag. You think you're so clever, he sneered. But you'll see. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. Talou could hear the fury in his voice, but she remained calm. You can try, Pascal, but I won't back down. Without another word, she hung up. She wasn't naive. Pascal was a man who would stop at nothing to protect his pride. He would fight back harder now, but she had no intention of backing away. This fight wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her life. The unraveling. Pascal's retaliation came swiftly. A few days later, Talou's bank accounts were frozen. She received notices from several of her business contacts that Pascal's lawyers had filed lawsuits, claiming that she had breached their prenuptial agreement. Her world seemed to tilt on its axis. But Talou didn't panic. She knew this was coming. Pascal's power was in his ability to control, to intimidate. But this time, she had the resources and the resolve to fight back. Talou's first call was to Diana. We need to hit him where it really hurts, she said, her voice steady but determined. We're not just going to defend against his attacks. We're going to make sure his empire is in danger. Diana's voice was firm. What are you thinking? I'm going after his businesses. We'll expose the financial fraud he's been hiding for years. I'll make sure his board of directors knows exactly what kind of man they've been working with. It was a dangerous game to play. Pascal's legal team would be relentless, but Talou had nothing left to lose. And if she was going to fall, she was going to take him down with her. The final decision. Talou sat at her desk late into the night, reviewing the documents one last time. The pieces were all in place. She had everything she needed to expose Pascal for the fraud he was. But there was one last decision to make. Pascal had one final trump card, his influence in the city. If Talou went public with the information she had, there was a chance he could twist the narrative, paint her as the villain, and destroy her reputation in the process. But Talou wasn't afraid anymore. She stood up, looking out the window at the glittering city of Lagos. This city had taken so much from her, but it was also the place where she had found her strength. And now, she was ready to take the next step. Tomorrow, she would make the first move. The final move. The one that would change everything. Pascal had underestimated her for too long. Now, it was her turn to make the rules. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Toulouse sat at her kitchen table, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her shoulders. The legal documents were spread out before her fingers grazing over them as if she could sense the power in every word. Today was the day she would make her move. She had spent countless hours preparing, consulting with Diana, and ensuring that every piece of evidence she had gathered was foolproof. This wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about taking back control of her life, her narrative. Toulouse had learned how to fight silently, how to endure the insults and manipulations. But now, she was done with silence. Pascal had built his empire on lies and power. It was time to tear it all down. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Adebayo. Toulouse, I've done some digging. Pascal isn't deeper than you think. Be careful. Toulouse read the message, her brow furrowing. She had expected something like this. Pascal wasn't just going to let her expose him without a fight. But this warning only reinforced her resolve. She had come too far to back out now. Toulouse took a deep breath, standing up and pacing the room. She could feel the tension building inside her, the anticipation, the fury that had been simmering for so long. Every insult, every accusation, every betrayal. This was the moment to make them count. The phone rang again, breaking her thoughts. It was Diana. I've got the final draft ready, Diana said, her voice calm but with an undertone of urgency. We're set to release everything today. Are you sure you're ready? Toulouse nodded, even though Diana couldn't see her. Yes, I'm ready. You know this will be the moment he comes after you with everything he's got, right? I've already prepared for that. Toulouse's voice was steady, even more resolute than before. I'm not going down without a fight. All right, I'll send the release to the press in an hour. Make sure it's everywhere, Toulouse said, her words carrying the weight of a woman who had made her decision and wasn't looking back. As the phone call ended, Toulouse felt the calm before the storm. It was happening. The world she had once been a prisoner in was finally turning on its axis. By midday, the news began to circulate. The article hit major outlets, detailing Pascal's financial fraud, his involvement in illegal ventures, and the manipulation of his business partners. Every page of the report painted him as the ruthless, greedy man he was, and the public was eating it up. It didn't take long for Pascal to react. Toulouse's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Pascal. Her heart didn't race anymore. There was nothing he could say that would make her waver. She answered the call. You think you can destroy me? Pascal's voice was full of rage, and Toulouse could hear the sharpness in every word. You've made a huge mistake, Toulouse. I won't let you get away with this. Toulouse leaned back in her chair, her voice cold. You don't get to scare me anymore, Pascal. I've lived under your thumb for long enough. You've made your life on lies, and now it's time for the truth to come out. You're just a pawn, Toulouse. Do you really think you're going to win? You've exposed yourself as nothing but a schemer, a woman who'll do anything to ruin me. Toulouse felt a brief, bitter smile tug at the corner of her lips. It's too late for threats, Pascal. You're exposed. And when the truth comes out, it's you who will be ruined, not me. There was silence on the other end of the line. Toulouse could almost hear the rage building inside him, his mind scrambling for a way to turn the tables. But she had already won. You'll regret this, Pascal spat before hanging up. Toulouse sat there for a moment, the phone pressed to her ear, the tension from the conversation hanging in the air. This was just the beginning. Pascal wasn't going to let this go easily, but Toulouse knew he couldn't hide behind his wealth forever. She had planted the seed of doubt, and now it was up to the world to see him for who he truly was. Hours passed, and the media frenzy only grew louder. News outlets ran story after story, dissecting every detail of Pascal's empire. Investors pulled out. Clients canceled contracts. People were outraged that they had supported such a man. His reputation, once untouchable, was crumbling before his eyes. Toulouse watched the chaos unfold with a strange sense of satisfaction. She had done this. She had set the wheels in motion, and now, she was watching it all unravel. But even as she stood at the precipice of her victory, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut. Pascal wasn't finished yet. That night, as she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed once more. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a message. "I know what you're doing, Talou, and I'll make sure you never escape me." Talou's pulse quickened. It was a chilling message, one that sent a shiver down her spine. She didn't need to ask who it was. Pascal was sending a message of his own. He wasn't going down without a fight. She had been prepared for this. But now, with the stakes higher than ever, Talou realized the full extent of what she had set in motion. Pascal wasn't just fighting to save his image. He was fighting for his life. And so was she. The days that followed were a blur of chaos. Pascal fought back aggressively, hiring a team of private investigators, digging into Talou's past, attempting to turn the public against her. He filed counter-lawsuits, accusing her of slander, defamation, and fraud. But with each move he made, Talou had a counter-strategy. Her world was now a game of chess, and every step she took had to be calculated. But despite the mounting pressure, Talou felt something she hadn't in years: freedom. She wasn't just fighting to escape Pascal's grip anymore. She was fighting for herself, for the woman she had become. She was no longer the timid, scared wife she had once been. She was Talou Adams, a force to be reckoned with. The fight was far from over. Pascal would stop at nothing to reclaim control. But Talou had learned one thing. When you've been pushed to the edge, you discover just how much strength you really have. And she wasn't about to lose now. The days grew longer, and the city seemed to hum with an undercurrent of tension. The battle between Pascal and Talou had reached its apex, and both were fighting with everything they had. Talou was no longer simply playing defense. She was actively seeking to dismantle the foundation Pascal had built his empire on. But with every victory, every step forward, there was a price to pay. The once quiet apartment where Talou had lived with Pascal now felt like a battlefield. She could almost feel the weight of his anger bearing down on her. The walls, once a symbol of her confinement, now stood as silent witnesses to the war she had waged, one that had consumed her life. But Talou was no longer afraid. One morning, Talou received a call from her lawyer, Diana. The tone in Diana's voice was serious, almost urgent. "Talou, we need to talk. There's been a development. Something you need to be aware of." Diana's words sent a chill through Talou's body. She knew that this wasn't just about legal maneuvering anymore. Pascal was dangerous. "What happened?" Talou asked, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "Diana, you're scaring me," she admitted. "What's going on?" "Pascal. He's been going after your friends, your family. I have reason to believe that he's using his influence to make life difficult for the people closest to you. I don't think he's going to stop until he's completely destroyed you," Diana said, her words blunt. Talou felt her world shift. She had always known that Pascal would stop at nothing to win, but hearing it from Diana made the reality sink in with terrifying clarity. Pascal wasn't just fighting for his empire anymore. He was trying to erase her completely. "Are you sure about this?" Talou asked, her voice tight. "I've seen the signs. I've been getting reports about strange things happening around people you know. It's not a coincidence." Diana's voice softened slightly. "Talou, we need to take extra precautions now." Talou's thoughts raced. Pascal was always one step ahead of her. She had anticipated his legal retaliation, his attempts to smear her name. But now, with him targeting the people she loved, the stakes were higher than ever. "I can't let him get away with this," Talou said, her voice cold, filled with resolve. "I know. We need to protect the people around you, and we need to keep fighting. But you have to be careful, Talou. Pascal isn't someone to underestimate," Diana cautioned. "I know," Talou whispered. "I won't let him destroy me or the people I love." With the pressure mounting, Talou's resolve only grew stronger. She knew that to truly beat Pascal, she needed to outsmart him completely. The weeks had been grueling, but the pieces were finally coming together. A breakthrough came when one of Pascal's former business associates reached out to her. His name was Ao, and he had once been a close partner of Pascal's in one of his most lucrative ventures. Ao had been in hiding for years after a falling out with Pascal over a shady deal that had been swept under the rug. Ao, though reluctant at first, agreed to help. He provided Talou with key documents, legal contracts, internal communications, and financial records that proved Pascal's involvement in illegal activities that went far beyond what had already been exposed. These were the smoking guns she needed. Talou couldn't believe her luck. Ao's information was like a treasure trove, one that could deliver the final blow to Pascal's empire. She and Diana reviewed the documents together, their eyes widening as they went through each page. "This is it, Talou. This is what we've been waiting for," Diana said, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "We have him," Talou replied, a spark of triumph in her eyes. "This is what will bring him down for good." But even as Talou reveled in her victory, she knew the danger wasn't over. Pascal would fight harder than ever now that he was truly cornered. He wouldn't go down without a vicious struggle, and Talou wasn't naive enough to think that the battle would end just because she had uncovered the truth. She couldn't afford to be complacent. As Talou prepared to release the new evidence to the authorities, she received an unexpected visit. It was late in the evening, and she had just returned home from a long day at the lawyer's office when a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She hesitated before opening it, but when she did, she froze. Standing there, with a smug expression plastered on his face, was Pascal. "Pascal," Talou said, her voice cold. She had expected a confrontation, but she hadn't anticipated this. Him standing in front of her, in person, at her door. "Talou," Pascal said with a twisted grin, "I see you've been busy, but you have no idea what you're really up against." Talou crossed her arms, stepping back slightly but not backing down. "I've seen enough of you to know exactly what I'm up against, Pascal. You can't intimidate me anymore." Pascal's eyes darkened. "I always knew you had it in you, Talou, but don't think for a second that I won't retaliate. You've crossed a line, and there's no coming back from this." Talou's heart beat faster, but she held her ground. "I'm not scared of you anymore." "You should be," Pascal warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You've exposed me, yes, but you've also exposed yourself. You think you're going to win? I'll make sure you lose everything. You have no idea how far I'm willing to go to make sure you're destroyed." Talou didn't flinch. "Do your worst, Pascal. I'm not afraid of you anymore." For a moment, there was silence between them. Talou felt the tension crackling in the air, but she refused to be intimidated. Then, Pascal took a step closer. "You'll regret this, Talou. You'll wish you never crossed me." He paused, a dark glint in his eye. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." And with that, he turned and left, leaving Talou standing in her doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. Talou knew that Pascal was dangerous, but she also knew that this was her moment. If she didn't act now, she might never get the chance again. He was trying to intimidate her, to shake her resolve, but she wouldn't let him. Tomorrow, she would make her final move. She would release the evidence, expose Pascal for the criminal he truly was, and take back everything he had stolen from her. But one question lingered in her mind. How far was Pascal willing to go to keep his empire intact? As Talou turned off the lights and lay in bed that night, she knew the battle was far from over. Pascal would stop at nothing to keep his power, and the fight between them was only escalating. The question now was, who would come out on top? She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. But she also knew that this fight was far from over. The next morning, Talou woke up with a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in years. The weight of the world seemed to be on her shoulders, but she was ready. She had gathered all the evidence, and she knew it would be enough to bring Pascal down. But there was one crucial thing she needed to do. Make sure he couldn't retaliate in the way he had promised. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table, interrupting her thoughts. It was from Diana. "Talou, it's happening. We have to go public now, before Pascal gets his hands on the information. He's already making moves to discredit you. We can't wait any longer." Talou's fingers hovered over the screen, her heart racing. The urgency in Diana's message was clear. If they didn't act now, Pascal might find a way to bury the evidence before it could even reach the public. Pascal was dangerous, and Talou knew that if she gave him the chance, he would stop at nothing to destroy her. She quickly typed a response. "I'm ready. Let's do it." With that, Talou stood up and prepared for the day ahead. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple but powerful outfit, something that would make a statement without saying a word. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. The timid, scared wife she had once been was long gone. In her place stood a woman who had fought for her freedom, for her life, and had refused to be silenced. Today, she would take the fight to Pascal. By midday, Toulouse stood in front of a packed room of journalists and reporters, the cameras flashing as the press conference began. She could feel the eyes of the world on her, but she didn't flinch. This was her moment. Beside her stood Diana, her trusted lawyer and confidant, who had been instrumental in organizing everything. "Toulouse, are you sure about this?" Diana whispered under her breath as the reporters took their seats, their pens ready to capture every word. "I have no choice," Toulouse whispered back. "This is the only way I can make him face the consequences. If I don't do this now, he'll ruin me and everyone I care about." Diana nodded in agreement, her face set with determination. "All right, let's do this." The room quieted as Toulouse stepped forward, the microphone standing before her. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she took a deep breath and steadied herself. This was not just about exposing Pascal. It was about reclaiming her life, her power, and her dignity. "Good afternoon," Toulouse began, her voice calm but firm. "I stand before you today not as the wife of Pascal Adams, but as a woman who has been subjected to manipulation, control, and deceit for far too long." The room was silent as every reporter leaned in, eager to hear what she would say next. "For years, I have lived in the shadow of a man who believed he could control me, because I was weak, because I had nothing. But I am here today to show you that I am not weak. I am not the victim, and I will not be silenced any longer." Toulouse paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. She knew this was just the beginning. Pascal had built his empire on lies, but now it was time for the truth to come out. Pascal Adams is a man who has built his fortune by exploiting others, by manipulating everyone around him to keep his empire intact. But what you don't know is the extent of his actions. Behind the success, behind the charm, lies a man who has committed crimes. Crimes that go beyond financial fraud, crimes that have hurt people I loved. As Toulouse spoke, she could see the shock on the faces of the reporters. They were hearing everything she had to say, and they were hungry for more. "I have here, in my hand, the proof of Pascal Adams' criminal activities. This evidence will expose him for who he truly is, and I will not rest until the world knows the truth." The reporters gasped as Toulouse held up the stack of documents that AO had given her. The evidence was irrefutable. Pascal's ties to shady business dealings, his exploitation of his employees, and his involvement in fraudulent activities were all laid bare for the world to see. "I am not doing this to destroy him. I am doing this to take back my life. I am doing this so that no one else will fall victim to his lies. And I am doing this because it is time for justice." There was a long silence before one of the reporters asked, "What do you expect to happen now, Mrs. Adams? What will be the consequences for your husband?" Toulouse's gaze hardened as she looked at the reporter. "Pascal Adams will face the consequences of his actions. It's time for him to be held accountable, and the world will finally see him for who he is. He can no longer hide behind his wealth and his reputation. The truth will set us all free." As the press conference ended and Toulouse stepped out of the spotlight, she knew that this was only the beginning. Pascal would retaliate, and he wouldn't stop until he had ruined her completely. She had exposed him, but she also knew that he had his own weapons: his wealth, his power, and his ability to manipulate people. Just hours after the press conference, Pascal's lawyers sent Toulouse a cease and desist letter, demanding that she retract her statements and remove the evidence she had shared. They threatened her with everything: lawsuits, financial ruin, even public humiliation. Toulouse read the letter, her hands shaking for the first time since she had made her decision to expose him. But she didn't back down. She had known this would come. She had anticipated it. "Let him try," she muttered to herself, a fierce determination in her eyes. But as the days passed, the tension grew. Pascal's retaliation was swift and calculated. He had already begun using his influence to manipulate the media, casting doubt on Toulouse's character and accusing her of fabricating the evidence. But the more Pascal fought back, the more he exposed himself. The more he tried to discredit Toulouse, the more the public began to question his actions. It wasn't long before cracks started to appear in Pascal's empire. Investors pulled their money, business partners started distancing themselves, and the once untouchable businessman was beginning to lose everything. But still, Pascal wasn't finished. He fought back with everything he had, using every legal tactic, every trick in the book. Toulouse knew he would keep coming, trying to destroy her with every move. But she had made a promise to herself and to the world that she would never back down. The fight had only just begun. That night, as Toulouse lay in bed, she reflected on everything that had happened. The world was changing. Pascal was losing his grip, and Toulouse had finally found her voice. She was no longer just the woman behind a powerful man. She was her own force, her own identity, and she had learned to fight with everything she had. But even as she felt the weight of her success, she knew that the real battle was just beginning. Pascal would keep coming. The legal fights would intensify. The danger wasn't over yet. But Toulouse wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned that strength didn't come from avoiding pain. It came from enduring it and using it to fuel the fight. And she would fight until the very end. The days following the press conference were a blur of legal battles, media coverage, and tense confrontations. Pascal's response to Toulouse's revelation was nothing short of ruthless. He began using every weapon at his disposal, from high-priced lawyers to smear campaigns, trying to claw back the control he had once held so firmly. But Toulouse wasn't backing down. She had exposed him, and now she was going to make sure that nothing could erase the truth. However, Toulouse knew that the next few weeks would be the most dangerous. Pascal was cornered, and a cornered animal was always the most dangerous. Pascal's last play. Toulouse sat in her office one afternoon, staring at the stack of papers in front of her. Court documents, legal papers, contracts, and the irrefutable evidence that had shaken Pascal's empire. The world had heard her story, but now it was time for her to follow through. She could feel the tension in the air, like a storm that was waiting to break. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was Diana. Toulouse, we've got a problem. Pascal's not done. We need to move fast. Toulouse's stomach tightened. What do you mean? What's happening? Pascal's been making backdoor deals, trying to buy off-key witnesses. He's even hired a team of private investigators to dig into your past. We need to act fast if we want to keep him from turning this around. Toulouse clenched her fists. I won't let him turn this around. It's time to make the final move. But she knew that it wasn't going to be easy. Pascal had friends in high places, people who would do anything to protect him, even if it meant hurting her. This wasn't just a battle for her life. It was a battle for her very freedom. And now, she needed to get ahead of him. Toulouse stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the sprawling city below. The skyline of Lagos stretched before her, a symbol of everything she had fought for, and everything she was on the verge of losing. But she wasn't going to lose. She had come too far to let Pascal win now. I'm not afraid of him anymore, Toulouse whispered to herself. Late that evening, Toulouse received a call that she hadn't been expecting. It was from a number she didn't recognize, and her first instinct was to ignore it. But something told her that this call was important. She picked up. Hello? She asked, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. Miss Adams, a man's voice said, smooth but chilling. I think you should know that Pascal is prepared to make a deal with you. He's offering you a way out. All of this can end if you just... Toulouse cut him off before he could finish. If you're calling to threaten me, or try to bribe me, you're wasting your time. I've already made my decision. The man on the other end of the line chuckled, but there was no humor in it. I'm not here to threaten you, Miss Adams. I'm here to offer you a choice. Pascal is offering you a deal. If you walk away, if you stop fighting him, he'll make sure you and your family are taken care of. No more legal battles. No more public humiliation. Just money, power, and peace. Toulouse's mind raced. This wasn't just a warning. It was an attempt to manipulate her. Pascal was trying to play on her vulnerabilities, her desire for peace, her longing for security. But Toulouse had already learned that there was no peace with Pascal. No amount of money could make her forget what he had done to her. I'll never give up, Never back down. You tell Pascal that, Toulouse said, her voice firm. There's no deal. I'm not afraid of him anymore. The line went silent for a moment. Then, the voice on the other end spoke, colder than before. We'll see about that. The call ended, and Toulouse stood still for a moment, feeling a chill run down her spine. She had known Pascal would resort to threats, but hearing it from one of his hired hands made the reality even more terrifying. He wasn't just fighting for his empire. He was fighting to ruin her, to crush everything she had worked for. But she wasn't afraid. The next morning, Toulouse sat down with Diana, preparing to take the final step in exposing Pascal once and for all. They had the evidence. They had the documents that would end Pascal's reign of terror. We can't wait any longer, Diana said, her tone grave. We need to release everything. We need to show the world who Pascal really is. Toulouse nodded. It's time. But just as they were about to make the move, a knock on the door interrupted them. Toulouse's heart skipped a beat. She knew who it was before the door opened. Pascal. He walked into the room, a smug smile playing on his lips. He was calm, collected, almost too calm. Toulouse, he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. You've done a great job, but I think you've underestimated me. I've always known you were strong, but you've made one fatal mistake. You've made an enemy of me. Toulouse stood up slowly, not showing any sign of fear. You can't stop me, Pascal. Not this time. Pascal's smile faltered for a split second, then he regained his composure. We'll see about that. You think you've won, but you're about to lose everything. I'll make sure of it. I've already won, Toulouse replied, her voice steady. You're the one who's about to lose it all. Pascal's eyes flashed with fury. You think you're so clever. You think you can destroy me. But let me make one thing clear. There's nothing you can do that will change who I am. I will crush you, and when I do, I'll make sure you'll never recover. Toulouse didn't flinch. You can try, but it won't work. You've already lost. With that, she walked toward her desk, grabbed the final stack of evidence, and handed it to Diana. Make the call. It's time to end this. Pascal's face twisted in anger as he watched Diana leave the room. You really think the world will believe you? You're just a woman with no power. You're nothing. Toulouse turned to him, her expression unwavering. I am everything you never understood, and I will not be destroyed. The door slammed behind Diana as she made the call to the authorities. The fallout was swift. By the evening, news outlets were reporting on Pascal's involvement in a web of illegal activities, fraud, corruption, money laundering, and much more. The documents Toulouse had released painted a picture of a man who had used his wealth and power to destroy lives, a man whose empire was built on lies. Pascal's world began to crumble. Investors pulled out, business partners abandoned him, and legal authorities began investigating his every move. The public had turned against him, and his carefully crafted image of a wealthy, successful businessman was shattered forever. Toulouse had won, but she knew that the battle wasn't over yet. Pascal was still dangerous, and he would never give up trying to destroy her. But Toulouse had proven that she would never back down, no matter what it cost her. The fight had only just begun, but this time, she wasn't alone. She had the truth on her side, and with that, Toulouse prepared for whatever came next. Pascal's empire had crumbled, but the real battle for her freedom was still to come. The days following the release of the evidence were a whirlwind of media frenzy, legal action, and public scrutiny. The world had finally seen the truth about Pascal Adams, and the damage was irreversible. His reputation was in tatters, and his empire, built on corruption and deceit, began to unravel before his very eyes. For Toulouse, the victory was bittersweet. She had exposed Pascal for who he truly was, but the cost of that victory was far greater than she had anticipated. The stress, the legal battles, the media attention, it was all taking a toll on her. She had taken on the fight for her freedom, but now she had to figure out how to live in a world where her every move was being watched. Toulouse spent most of the next few weeks at home, avoiding public appearances and focusing on herself. Diana continued to fight for her in the legal arena, ensuring that Pascal's assets were frozen and that he couldn't retaliate in any significant way. Yet, as each day passed, Talou couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at her. Pascal was no longer a man with power and influence, but she knew that his desperation would lead him to do anything, to regain control over his life. One afternoon, Talou sat alone in her apartment, the soft hum of the city outside her window. She was reflecting on everything that had happened, the pain, the betrayal, and, most importantly, the strength she had found within herself. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone, but when she opened it, she was taken aback. It was Ao, the investigative journalist who had helped her gather the crucial evidence against Pascal. He stood there, holding a file in his hands, his expression grave. Ao? Talou asked, her voice hesitant. What's going on? Ao stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the room before meeting hers. He handed her the file, his expression unreadable. Pascal's not done, Talou. He's gone underground, trying to build alliances with people who are even more dangerous than him. This isn't over. Talou felt her heart race as she opened the file. Inside were new reports, photos, and intelligence that painted a disturbing picture. Pascal hadn't just lost his fortune and reputation. He was plotting something far more sinister. I knew he wouldn't just let it go, Talou whispered, her stomach turning. But how do we stop him now? How do I protect myself and those I care about? Ao sat down across from her, his eyes filled with concern. We need to stay ahead of him. He's already reached out to some influential people, criminals, corrupt politicians. If he can, he'll use them to turn this around. He'll try to discredit you, silence you, and make sure that everything you've exposed is buried. Talou closed the file, a sense of dread settling over her. I didn't expect it to be easy, but I thought... I know, Ao interrupted. You thought it was over. But Pascal isn't like other men. He's dangerous, and he's willing to go to any lengths to keep his power. Talou's mind raced. She had fought so hard, and now, it seemed as though the battle was far from over. But there was one thing she knew for sure. She wouldn't run from him. She had made that mistake once before, and she wasn't going to make it again. I can't back down now, Ao, she said, her voice firm. He may be dangerous, but I've already proven that I'm stronger than him. If he wants to keep fighting, then so be it. I'll fight until the very end. Ao gave her a nod, his admiration for her unwavering. I'm with you, Talou. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. As Ao left, Talou stood by the window once again, the city sprawling before her. The battle was far from over. Pascal was still out there, lurking in the shadows, trying to reclaim the power he had lost. But Talou had something he could never take from her. Her strength, her voice, and the truth. No matter what came next, Talou was prepared. Weeks passed, and the fight for Talou's freedom intensified. Pascal's lawyers tried to drag the case out, filing endless appeals and counterclaims. But with each failed attempt, Pascal's influence waned. The public had turned against him, and his actions only made him look more desperate. The media continued to report on his criminal activities, exposing the darkness behind his polished facade. But Pascal wasn't just letting it go. He wasn't finished. He'd spent years building his empire, and he wasn't about to lose everything without one last effort to reclaim his power. He knew he couldn't go back to being the man he was before. His name had been dragged through the mud, but he still had something Talou didn't: resources. One evening, Talou received a call from Diana. Talou, I have some bad news, Diana said, her voice strained. Pascal has filed for bankruptcy, but he's also making moves to secure financial backing from some very dangerous people. He's trying to use his connections to make a comeback. Talou's heart sank. She had known Pascal wouldn't go down easily, but this was more than she had anticipated. What does that mean for me? It means he'll stop at nothing to get back in control, Diana said. But we've got one advantage. Pascal underestimated you. He thought he could control you, and now, he's misjudging you again. He thinks he can just use money and power to fix everything. But he's wrong. Talou leaned back in her chair, staring at the city beyond her window. She had fought for so long to free herself from Pascal's hold, and now, she was on the edge of victory. Pascal will never have control over me again, Toulouse said, her voice filled with resolve. I've already made my choice, and I'm not afraid anymore. The next few days were tense as Toulouse and Diana worked together, gathering the final pieces of evidence to secure Pascal's downfall once and for all. Pascal's plans to regain his wealth and power were well underway, but every move he made seemed to dig him deeper into a hole he couldn't escape from. As they prepared for the final showdown, Toulouse knew one thing for sure. She had come too far to let Pascal win. The courtroom was packed. Pascal sat at the defendant's table, his face hardened and unforgiving. But the fight was different now. He no longer had the upper hand. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. Toulouse stood tall, her head held high as she walked to the witness stand. She had come this far, not just for herself, but for the women and men who had been silenced by people like Pascal. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for the future. The judge called the proceedings to order, and the case unfolded before them. With every piece of evidence Toulouse presented, Pascal's empire crumbled even more. His once mighty defenses fell apart as the truth became undeniable. Pascal's arrogance faded as the court session dragged on. He began to show signs of desperation, sweating, fidgeting, his eyes darting around the room as though looking for a way out. But there was no escape. When the final verdict came down, it was clear. Pascal Adams was finished. The court ruled in Toulouse's favor. He was found guilty of fraud, money laundering, and numerous other charges. His assets were seized, and he was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Toulouse left the courtroom that day feeling a sense of finality, but she knew this victory wasn't just about Pascal. It was about reclaiming her life. The woman who had once been silenced, who had once been broken, was now stronger than ever. As she walked out of the courthouse, her phone buzzed with a message from Diana. You did it, Toulouse. You won. And with that, Toulouse knew that her fight was finally over. But her journey, her new beginning, was just beginning. In the months that followed Pascal's conviction, Toulouse began to experience a sense of peace that had been absent from her life for so long. The weight that had once consumed her, fear, uncertainty, and the constant struggle against Pascal, was finally lifted. The media had moved on to other stories, and the public's fascination with Pascal's fall from grace began to fade. Yet, Toulouse had changed. She was no longer the quiet woman who had once been swallowed by the shadows of a toxic marriage. Instead, she stood tall in her newfound freedom. She focused on rebuilding her life, her career, and her personal relationships. Toulouse had always dreamed of starting her own business, and now, with the legal battle behind her, she was ready to take that step. However, despite the calm exterior, Toulouse could feel something simmering just beneath the surface. She knew that Pascal, although incarcerated, had a far-reaching network, and his loyal followers, those who had profited from his criminal activities, were still out there. The fear of retribution lingered at the back of her mind, but she refused to let it control her. Toulouse threw herself into her new venture. With the help of Diana and Ao, she was able to secure funding and open a non-profit organization aimed at helping women who had suffered abuse and exploitation, just as she had. It was her way of taking the pain she had endured and transforming it into something positive for others. Still, even as Toulouse built her new life, a part of her knew that Pascal's story wasn't over. The man had survived worse, and as long as he had connections, there was always a chance he could find a way to resurface. One evening, as Toulouse was finalizing plans for a gala to raise funds for her nonprofit, she received an unexpected visit. It was late, and she had just settled into bed when the doorbell rang. She hesitated. Who would be visiting her at this hour? When she opened the door, her heart skipped a beat. It was Ao, but his usual calm demeanor was gone. His eyes were wide with worry, and his face was pale. Toulouse, we need to talk, Ao said, his voice low. Toulouse stepped aside, letting him into the apartment. What's wrong? Ao took a deep breath before speaking. I've been following some leads, and I think Pascal is more dangerous than we realized. He's been contacting people from his past, people who can still cause trouble. He's making plans to get out. Toulouse's heart sank. What are you saying? He's already in prison. How is he going to do anything? Ao shook his head, pacing nervously. He has people on the outside. People who owe him favors. You remember how he always operated from the shadows. How he had everything under his control, right? Well, he's still trying to pull strings. We're not done with him, Talou. Not yet. Talou swallowed hard, her mind racing. But I exposed him. He's been convicted. He's not supposed to have any influence anymore. Ao's expression softened. That's the illusion. The truth is, Pascal's reach is still intact. His influence, even from behind bars, is far-reaching. And if he's plotting something, you need to be prepared. Talou felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had hoped that this nightmare was behind her, but the reality was sinking in. Pascal's web of control stretched far beyond the walls of the prison. I'll never let him get away with it again, Talou said, her voice steady with determination. We have to take him down for good. The next few days were filled with tension. Talou, Ao, and Diana worked tirelessly to dig deeper into Pascal's current activities. They investigated his associates, traced any suspicious transactions, and examined every lead that came their way. It wasn't just about protecting Talou anymore. It was about ensuring that Pascal never had the chance to hurt anyone again. As they combed through the information, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Pascal was indeed reaching out to his old allies, individuals who had previously helped him build his empire. He was laying the groundwork for an escape plan, a way to get out of prison and regain his power. The plan wasn't concrete yet, but it was clear that Pascal was preparing to make a move. He was in contact with a well-known criminal organization, one with resources and connections that could make his escape possible. Talou felt the weight of the situation settle over her like a thick fog. If Pascal was successful, the nightmare she had fought so hard to escape would start all over again. We have to stop him before he can act, Diana said, her voice sharp. We need to find out who his new allies are and put an end to this before it's too late. Talou nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. But we need to be careful. Pascal has never been predictable, and if he's learned anything from the past, it's how to manipulate the system. The trio spent the next several days working in secret, careful not to alert anyone that they were onto Pascal's plans. They contacted law enforcement, met with insiders who had information about Pascal's dealings, and began to piece together the puzzle of his next move. It was clear now, Pascal wasn't just plotting to escape. He was planning something far more dangerous, a total reinvention. He didn't just want to get out of prison. He wanted to rise again, to reclaim everything he had lost and more. And he was willing to do anything to make that happen. One night, Talou received a tip-off that Pascal's plan was coming to a head. His allies were making a move, and it was only a matter of time before Pascal would attempt to escape. With the help of the authorities, Talou and her team had to act fast. The night was dark, and the city was eerily quiet as they prepared for what could be the final confrontation. Talou knew that this was her last chance to end this chapter once and for all. If Pascal succeeded in his escape, everything she had worked for would be destroyed. Talou stood at the entrance of the prison, a group of law enforcement officers at her side. She had made arrangements to meet with the head of security, who had agreed to help them intercept Pascal's escape plan. As they moved closer to the compound, a surge of adrenaline coursed through Talou's veins. She was ready. This was her moment to ensure that Pascal would never hurt anyone again. The minutes felt like hours as they waited in the shadows, watching the prison gates, knowing that Pascal's final play was about to unfold. Talou's heart raced as she heard footsteps in the distance. They were close. Then, the silence was shattered by the sound of shouting and scrambling. Pascal's plan was in motion. The authorities closed in, and within moments, they were on him. Pascal was cornered, his escape thwarted. He was no longer a threat. As Pascal was escorted back to prison, his once proud demeanor shattered, Talou felt a sense of finality wash over her. He had lost, not just his freedom, but his power, his empire, and his future. For the first time in years, Talou felt the weight of the past truly lift from her shoulders. She had done it. She had fought back. And she had won. The days following Pascal's failed escape attempt were filled with relief, but also a renewed sense of vigilance. Talou knew that even though Pascal was back in prison and his influence was temporarily crippled, the fight for her safety and her future was far from over. Pascal was a man who thrived in the shadows, and even in his defeat, he could still have hidden resources waiting to resurface. But for the first time in years, Talou felt a strange sense of calm. The storm had passed, or so she thought. She spent the next few weeks focusing on her nonprofit, dedicating her energy to the women she had vowed to help. The gala she had planned was a success, raising funds that would allow her to expand the outreach of her organization and help even more women find the support and resources they needed to rebuild their lives. Despite her successes, Talou couldn't shake the feeling that the peace she was experiencing was temporary. The more she thought about Pascal's failed escape, the more she realized how deeply ingrained his network was. The men and women who had once operated in his shadow were still out there, and Talou was now the face of their downfall. It wasn't long before a familiar face reappeared in her life. Diana called one evening, her voice carrying a note of urgency. "Talou, I think you need to see this," she said, her tone serious. "We've uncovered something." Talou's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "There's a new player in town," Diana explained. "Someone who's been quietly pulling strings in the background. We don't know exactly who they are yet, but they're connected to Pascal's old allies. They're looking to continue his legacy, to rebuild the empire he lost." Talou felt a chill run down her spine. "So, it's not over?" "No," Diana replied. "This is just the beginning. We've traced their movements, but they're smart. Whoever they are, they know how to stay under the radar. It's like they're planning something big, and I don't think they'll stop until they get it." Talou took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She had never let fear control her before, and she wasn't about to start now. "Then we'll find them. We'll stop them before they get the chance to make their move." Days turned into weeks as Talou and her team delved deeper into the mystery of this new player. They worked tirelessly, piecing together every scrap of information they could find. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that this person, or group, was more dangerous than anything Pascal had ever orchestrated. The new threat was ruthless, smart, and calculating. They operated in the shadows, pulling strings and manipulating situations from behind the scenes. And they were willing to do anything to regain control of the power Pascal had once wielded. Talou found herself back in the trenches, but this time, there was a difference. The fear that once ruled her life had been replaced by something stronger: determination. She wasn't the same woman who had been trapped in a marriage built on manipulation and deceit. She had fought for her freedom, and she wasn't about to lose it now. She met with Ao regularly, updating him on their progress. He was instrumental in helping track down leads and gather information. They were getting closer to identifying the mastermind behind this new threat, but the closer they got, the more dangerous things became. One night, after a long day of meetings, Talou sat at her desk, sifting through files and documents. The city outside her window was alive with the hum of activity, but inside her apartment, there was a quiet tension. She could feel the weight of what was coming. She had always known that Pascal's defeat wouldn't be the end, but she hadn't expected this. An enemy that was more calculated, more secretive, and more determined. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was Ao. "Talou, I've got something," his voice crackled over the line. "I think I know who they are." Her pulse quickened. "Who?" "It's someone close to Pascal's past, a business partner he had before he was arrested. We've traced them to an underground operation. This person is working with a network of criminals and politicians, trying to rebuild everything Pascal lost." Talou's mind raced. "We need to move fast. Do you have a location?" "I'll send you the details," Ao replied. "But be careful. This person isn't just dangerous. They're connected to some very powerful people. We can't afford to underestimate them." Talou's resolve hardened. She had faced Pascal's wrath, and now she was about to confront someone even more dangerous. But she wasn't backing down. She'd come too far to let fear control her. The next few days were filled with frantic planning. Talou, Ao, and Diana worked together, preparing to confront this new threat head-on. They had tracked the individual's movements to an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place that reeked of secrecy and danger. The night they set out to confront the mastermind, the air was thick with tension. They had no idea who or what they were walking into, but Talou knew one thing. This was her fight, and she wasn't going to let anyone take her down. They arrived at the warehouse under the cover of darkness. Talu's heart raced as they moved through the shadows, trying to remain undetected. Every step they took felt like it was leading them into the unknown, but she couldn't afford to hesitate. She had come too far to turn back now. As they approached the entrance, a sudden noise made Talu freeze. She looked up just in time to see a figure silhouetted in the dim light of the warehouse. The person stepped forward, and Talu's breath caught in her throat. It was a familiar face. "Pascal," she whispered, disbelief lacing her voice. The man in front of her smiled, a cold, calculating smile. It wasn't Pascal, but it might as well have been. This man was the very person who had been pulling the strings from the shadows, the mastermind behind the resurgence of Pascal's empire. "I've been waiting for you, Talu," the man said, his voice dripping with menace. "You thought you could end this? You thought you could escape the legacy of Pascal Adams? You're wrong." Talu's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "I've already taken down Pascal. You think I'll back down now? You're mistaken." The man laughed, a low, chilling sound. "You haven't seen anything yet. You're still in my game." With a swift motion, he stepped back, disappearing into the darkness of the warehouse. The chase had only just begun. The pursuit was intense. Talu, Ao, and Diana fought their way through the maze of the warehouse, each corner concealing a new danger. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about defeating an individual. It was about preventing a larger, more dangerous movement from taking root. As they neared the center of the warehouse, Talu felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let anyone take away her hard-won freedom. Not now, not ever. She had come too far to lose everything again. Finally, they reached the heart of the operation. Talu faced the mastermind, a man whose greed and ambition mirrored Pascal's, but with a far more dangerous edge. He was ruthless, and he would stop at nothing to see his plan through. But Talu was no longer the woman she once was. She had the strength, the knowledge, and the courage to fight, and she was ready. The final confrontation was just beginning. The tension in the warehouse was palpable. Every footstep echoed ominously against the cold concrete, and every breath felt heavy as Talu and her team advanced deeper into the heart of the operation. The darkness seemed to wrap around them, but Talu's resolve only hardened with every step. She had been through the worst, survived unimaginable pain, and rebuilt herself from the ground up. Now, facing the last vestiges of Pascal's empire, there was no turning back. Ao motioned for silence, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Diana was by Talu's side, her hand gripping a flashlight tightly, ready to face whatever danger lay ahead. "Stay alert," Ao whispered, his voice tense. "This place is rigged with traps. We don't know how far this operation goes." Talu nodded, keeping her steps quiet. The flickering of the flashlight illuminated a series of abandoned machinery, broken windows, and cracked walls. The place felt like a tomb, full of echoes and abandoned memories. It was clear that whoever was behind this operation had been using it as a base for something much bigger and much darker. They moved cautiously, aware that the mastermind, whoever he was always a few steps ahead. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows ahead. Talu's heart skipped a beat as the person stepped into the dim light, their face obscured by a hood. "It's you," Talu said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The figure stood tall, their posture confident, yet there was something unsettling about the way they moved, like a predator who knew exactly how to use the darkness to their advantage. The man removed his hood slowly, revealing a face that was both unfamiliar and chillingly cold. He smiled, his lips curling up in a mocking gesture. "Ah, Talu, I knew you'd be the one to come. I've been waiting for this moment." Talu's breath quickened, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head, as though amused by her question. "I'm someone who believes in the strength of power and legacy. Pascal Adams may have fallen, but his empire didn't die with him." He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "I'm the one who's going to finish what Pascal started. And you," he pointed a finger at her, "you've been a thorn in my side for far too long." Talu felt a rush of anger surge through her. This wasn't just any criminal mastermind. This man had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to take over, to continue Pascal's legacy of control and manipulation. The chilling realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just become more dangerous. "You'll never rebuild what Pascal had," Toulouse said, her voice firm, though her insides churned with a mix of fear and determination. "Your empire ends here." The man's laugh was cold and dispassionate. "You're naive if you think I've been working alone. Pascal had many allies, and so do I. There's no ending this. There's only the beginning of something far bigger." Toulouse stood her ground. She was no longer the quiet woman hiding behind Pascal's shadow. She had fought too hard, for too long, to let this stranger continue what Pascal had started. She was the one in control now. "Then I'll fight until there's nothing left of you," she said with conviction. Before the man could respond, the air shifted. A sudden explosion from behind sent them all to the ground, the deafening blast reverberating through the warehouse, rattling the walls and shattering windows. Toulouse's ears rang as she scrambled to her feet, blinking against the haze of dust and smoke. "Move!" Ao shouted, pulling her by the arm. Diana followed close behind, both of them disoriented from the blast but determined to keep pushing forward. Toulouse's heart pounded in her chest as she staggered forward, the dust cloud making it difficult to see. She had no idea who had set off the explosion, but it was clear that the stakes were higher than they had ever been. This wasn't just about stopping a criminal operation anymore, it was about survival. They had been walking into a trap. As the smoke cleared, Toulouse could make out the shadowy figures emerging from the chaos. They weren't alone anymore. More men had appeared, armed and ready to fight. The mastermind had set them up perfectly. He was luring them into a deadly game, and Toulouse was the unwitting prey. Without a moment's hesitation, Ao raised his gun. "We need to get out now." Toulouse's eyes scanned the area frantically. Her mind raced for a solution. There was no way they could face these men head-on, not with the numbers stacked against them. "Take the back exit," Toulouse said quickly. "I'll hold them off." Ao shot her a look of disbelief. "Are you crazy? We need to stick together." "I'll be fine," she said, her voice resolute. "You need to get Diana to safety. Go." Ao hesitated, but he knew there was no time to argue. He grabbed Diana's arm and pulled her toward the back exit. Toulouse watched them disappear into the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath and turned to face the incoming threat. The men were closing in, their footsteps heavy on the concrete floor. Toulouse's mind raced as she scanned the area for anything she could use to her advantage. She spotted a stack of old crates and sprinted toward them, diving behind cover just as the first round of gunfire rang out. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she peered over the crates, watching the men move forward. They weren't just criminals, they were professionals, well-trained, cold, and ruthless. But Toulouse wasn't backing down. With a quick motion, she grabbed a nearby pipe and swung it hard at the first man to approach. The metal hit him square in the face, sending him crashing to the ground. She didn't waste any time. Her survival instinct kicked in, and she moved quickly, weaving through the maze of crates and shadows. But the sound of footsteps was closing in. She couldn't keep running forever. Just as one of the men lunged for her, she heard the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance. Toulouse's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone anymore. In that moment, the warehouse door crashed open. Police officers stormed in, weapons drawn. The criminals, caught off guard, hesitated for a split second, and that was all Toulouse needed. With lightning speed, she moved, catching one of the men by surprise and taking him down with a well-placed kick to the chest. Ao and Diana had returned, and together with the police, they quickly subdued the remaining attackers. The mastermind, the man who had been pulling the strings from the shadows, was caught. He was on the ground, his arms restrained by handcuffs, his face a mask of fury. "You can't stop what's coming," he spat at Toulouse. "This is bigger than you, bigger than Pascal ever was. You're nothing." Toulouse kneeled down beside him, her gaze unwavering. "I've already stopped you, and I'll keep stopping anyone who tries to take away the life I've built." With a final, defiant look, The man was hauled away by the police. But even as the warehouse cleared and the danger subsided, Talou knew this wasn't the end. There would always be someone waiting in the shadows, someone trying to destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. But she was ready. She had faced fear, faced betrayal, and faced unimaginable loss. Now, there was nothing left to stop her, and no one would ever control her again. The war may have been over, but the fight for her future had just begun. In the weeks that followed the raid on the warehouse, Talou's life settled into a routine, but the calm was fleeting. The police investigation into the criminal network that had been operating under the shadows of Pascal's empire was still ongoing. Though the mastermind behind the operation had been arrested, there were whispers in the underworld that his capture was only a temporary setback. Talou couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over, that it was merely gathering strength on the horizon. She threw herself into her work, more determined than ever to focus on her nonprofit and the women who depended on it. The gala had sparked a new wave of interest in her organization, and she was beginning to see the fruits of her labor. There were donations flowing in, volunteers eager to help, and women reaching out for support. Yet, despite the outward success, there was a lingering unease that gnawed at her. The fear that someone, somewhere, was planning something far more insidious. Ao and Diana were constantly on alert, their watchful eyes ever present as they monitored any signs of movement within the city's criminal networks. Their vigilance was relentless, but it wasn't enough. Talou knew that Pascal's former allies were not the kind of people to fade quietly into the background. There was always another player, another dangerous mind waiting to take control. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Talou stood by the large windows of her office, looking out over the sprawling city of Lagos. The lights below twinkled like 1,000 tiny stars, and the bustling sounds of the city seemed so distant, so far removed from the chaos that had dominated her life for so long. She thought of everything she had been through, the betrayal, the manipulation, the loss, and yet here she was, standing tall, stronger than she had ever been. But she knew she wasn't done yet. The phone buzzed on her desk, breaking her train of thought. She picked it up quickly, recognizing the number. It was Diana. "Talou, you need to hear this." Diana's voice crackled through the line. There was an urgency in her tone that immediately put Talou on edge. "What's going on?" Talou asked, her heart starting to race. "I've just received word from a source inside the police force. There's been a new development. It seems like one of Pascal's allies is still active. Someone with high-level connections is making a move to fill the power vacuum left behind," Diana explained. Talou's blood ran cold. "Who?" "We don't have all the details yet, but we know that whoever it is, they're linked to the corruption that runs deep within the city's political and business circles. We suspect they've been planning this for months. They're not going to stop until they take control of what's left of Pascal's empire." Talou's fists clenched. She could feel the weight of the fight ahead bearing down on her once again. Just when she thought she had won, just when she thought she could breathe freely, the battle was far from over. "Where do we start?" she asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. "We need to track down every lead we have." "I'll meet you at the office first thing tomorrow," Diana replied. "But be careful, Talou. Whoever this is, they're not just dangerous, they're organized. We don't know what we're walking into." "I'm not backing down," Talou said firmly. "Let's meet tomorrow. We'll figure this out." The next morning, Talou arrived at the office earlier than usual. Ao and Diana were already there, going through documents, cross-referencing names, and tracking down leads. The room was filled with the quiet hum of their determination, but the tension in the air was undeniable. "There's a name that keeps popping up," Ao said, his voice sharp with focus as he stared at the screen in front of him. Kahind Olamide, a businessman with ties to several major corporations in the city. "We believe he was one of Pascal's most trusted allies. It looks like he's been trying to reconnect with some of the old players from Pascal's network." Talou's eyes narrowed as she processed the name. Kahind Olamide was a name she had heard before. Whispers of his connections, his wealth, and his ruthless pursuit of power. He was a ghost in the city's business world, a shadow figure who operated behind the scenes, pulling strings to maintain control. Talou had always suspected he was involved, But now it seemed like he was making a very public play for power. "We need to get to him before he can make his move," Diana said, leaning over the desk. "If Olamide is trying to rebuild Pascal's empire, he's going to have a lot of resources at his disposal. We can't let him gain any ground." Talou nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we move fast. We'll gather all the intel we can on him. We need to understand his connections, his operations, everything." Ao typed furiously on his laptop, pulling up documents on Olamide. The more they dug, the more they realized how deeply Olamide had embedded himself into the city's fabric. He had influence in every sector: real estate, construction, politics, and his wealth allowed him to hide in plain sight. But Talou knew one thing for sure. They had to stop him before he could expand his reach. Over the next several weeks, Talou's life became a whirlwind of investigation and preparation. They discovered that Olamide had set up a series of shell companies to launder money and make moves in the legal and illegal markets. He had political connections, powerful friends, and a network of loyalists who would do anything to see him rise to power. Talou's team worked around the clock, piecing together the puzzle. They learned that Olamide was planning a major acquisition of a well-known company, one that would give him even more control over the city's infrastructure. He was preparing to announce the merger publicly in a matter of weeks. But there was something else, something even more disturbing. Talou discovered that Olamide wasn't just interested in power. He had a personal vendetta against her. He blamed her for the fall of Pascal's empire and was determined to make her pay for it. He knew that Talou was the one who had thwarted Pascal's final plans, and now she was standing in the way of his own. She couldn't afford to take him lightly. As the day of Olamide's announcement approached, Talou found herself caught in a web of fear and determination. She knew that he was a force to be reckoned with, but she had come too far to let him take what she had fought so hard to build. The plan was set. Talou would attend the public event, posing as a businesswoman interested in the acquisition. She would get close to Olamide, gather information, and disrupt his plans before they could unfold. But she wasn't going in alone. Ao and Diana would be by her side, monitoring from the shadows, ready to act if anything went wrong. They had a backup plan in place, but Talou knew it all depended on her. As the night of the event drew closer, the tension grew unbearable. The weight of everything she had fought for pressed down on her shoulders, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Olamide was one step ahead. He had been preparing for this moment for years, and now he was ready to make his move. Talou stood in front of the mirror, her reflection a reminder of how far she had come. She was no longer the woman trapped in a marriage of manipulation and control. She was a fighter, a survivor, and she was going to stop Olamide. The clock was ticking, and the storm was almost here. But Talou wasn't afraid. She was ready. The final showdown was about to begin. The night had arrived. The grand ballroom of one of Lagos's most prestigious hotels was filled with the city's elite, business moguls, politicians, and figures of influence. It was here that Kahind Olamide would unveil his latest business acquisition, and Talou knew this event would mark the beginning of the final phase in her fight against him. The air was thick with anticipation. Talou stood at the entrance of the ballroom, her gaze sweeping across the room, looking for the one person who had the power to turn her life upside down. Kahind Olamide. His reputation preceded him, but Talou was determined to put an end to his machinations. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored black dress, her hair neatly pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She had adopted a persona, one that would make her appear as another successful businesswoman, interested in the merger Olamide was presenting. But behind the poised facade was a mind that had been sharpened by years of pain and survival. Beside her, Ao and Diana moved through the crowd, keeping a close eye on any unusual activity. Their presence was discreet, but Talou could feel the weight of their support. This time, they would all be together for the most dangerous confrontation yet. As they made their way to the center of the room, Talou's eyes locked onto Olamide, who was standing at the podium, preparing to speak. He was every bit the powerful figure that Talou had heard about, tall, imposing, and dressed in a suit that seemed tailored for a king. His smile was calculated, but Talou could see the glint of ambition in his eyes. The moment the room fell silent, Olamide stepped up to the microphone, his voice smooth and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you tonight as part of a new era, a new legacy, a legacy built on the foundation of power, control, and success. Tonight, I am proud to announce my merger with one of the largest corporations in the country, a move that will solidify my place at the top of this city's business world. The crowd erupted in applause, but Talu couldn't take her eyes off him. She knew that Olamide wasn't just after money or power. He was after something deeper, something personal. He wanted to destroy her, just as he had tried to do with Pascal. Do not let the enemies of progress and unity try to stop us, Olamide continued, his words laced with veiled threats. There will always be people who want to see us fail, who want to tear us down, but we will rise above them. Together, we will build something that cannot be undone. Talu's heart raced. She could feel his eyes briefly scanning the room until they landed on her. There was no mistaking the recognition in his gaze. He knew exactly who she was. And he knew she wasn't just any businesswoman in the crowd. She was the woman who had thwarted Pascal, the woman who had defied him. But Talu wasn't going to back down. She smiled inwardly, knowing the time had come to put their plan into motion. As Olamide spoke, Talu's mind raced. She had already fed the police critical information about the event, and they were positioned around the venue, ready to move in if anything went wrong. But the most important part of the plan relied on one crucial detail, exposing Olamide's true nature in front of his audience. She signaled to Ao, who had been monitoring the crowd, and Diana, who was close to the stage. Ao nodded subtly, signaling that it was time. Talu took a deep breath and made her way to the front, stepping boldly into Olamide's line of sight. His smile faltered for a split second, and in that instant, Talu knew he was finally feeling the weight of the threat she posed. She moved closer to him, stepping up to the podium, as if she, too, had come to make an announcement. "Mr. Olamide," Talu's voice rang out clearly, cutting through the hum of the room. "It's so interesting to hear you talk about legacy and power. But there's something you've left out, something crucial about the way you've built your empire." The room went silent. All eyes turned to her, and Olamide's smile faltered further. He tried to regain control, but Talu could see the shift in his demeanor. "I have gathered information," she continued, her voice steady and unyielding, "on your connections, your operations, and the illegal activities you've been orchestrating in this city. You can't hide forever. The truth will come to light. You've been using your wealth and influence to control everything in this city. But it stops tonight." Gasps filled the room. Some of the people in the audience looked stunned, others unsure of what to make of her words. Talu's eyes never left Olamide, whose face had turned pale. He stepped back slightly, his hands shaking, but his pride wouldn't let him admit defeat just yet. "This is absurd," he said, his voice barely concealing his fury. "You think you can just come in here and accuse me of such things without proof?" Talu didn't flinch. She wasn't backing down. "You're a man who has made his money off of lies and corruption. I have proof, Olamide. And soon, everyone in this room will know exactly who you are." At that moment, Ao stepped forward with a laptop, displaying the evidence of Olamide's illegal dealings on the large screen behind them. The data was irrefutable. Money laundering, bribery, and ties to criminal organizations. Everything Olamide had worked so hard to conceal was now exposed for all to see. The room erupted into chaos. Whispers spread like wildfire, and Olamide's supporters quickly began to turn their backs on him. Some attempted to leave, others tried to get in touch with their lawyers. The elegant facade of the powerful businessman shattered before their eyes. Olamide's face twisted with rage. "You think you've won?" he spat, stepping toward Talu. "This isn't over. You're a fool to think you've taken me down. There are always more who will rise to take my place." Talu remained unshaken. "Maybe," she said, her voice cold and final. "But not today." The police, who had been positioned at strategic points around the venue, swooped in. They arrested Olamide on the spot, taking him away in handcuffs. The room was filled with the sounds of flashing cameras, angry voices, and the shuffling of feet as the crowd tried to process the events. Talu stood tall in the chaos, knowing that this was just the beginning. Olamide's arrest wasn't the end of the battle. It was a powerful statement. With Olamide's empire crumbling before him, The fight for power in Lagos would take on a new form. But one thing was clear. Tolu wasn't backing down. She had fought too long, too hard, and had lost too much to let it all slip away now. As she stood there, amidst the chaos and flashing lights, Tolu felt a sense of calm wash over her. This chapter had ended, but the story was far from finished. The future of Lagos, and her place in it, was still unfolding, and she was ready for whatever came next. The days following Olamide's arrest were filled with an unexpected sense of calm, yet there was no denying the underlying tension in the air. The media coverage of the event had been relentless, plastering Tolu's name across every headline, casting her as a heroine who had brought down one of the city's most powerful criminals. But with the victory came new challenges, challenges that Tolu knew all too well. The first came in the form of public scrutiny. While many celebrated her courage, others questioned her motives. There were whispers that Tolu had used the situation for her own gain, that she had manipulated the circumstances to advance her career or settle personal scores. Tolu was no stranger to the opinions of others, but this time, the scrutiny felt heavier. She had not sought this fight, but she had no choice but to see it through. A press conference was scheduled for her, and the pressure was mounting. She had to be careful with her words. She had to make sure the public understood that her actions were not driven by revenge or personal ambition, but by the need to protect the city she loved. Tolu sat in the quiet of her office, preparing herself mentally. Diana and Ao stood nearby, each silently offering their support. There were no words to say that could ease the tension. The battle was far from over, and Tolu knew she couldn't afford to show any signs of weakness. "I've got this," Tolu said, breaking the silence as she rose from her chair. Diana gave a small nod. "You've got more than this. You've earned it." Tolu smiled, but the weight of the situation remained. She couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something even bigger. The city had already seen what she was capable of, but there were still shadows lurking in the corners, shadows that Olamide had left behind. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. The press conference was held at a luxurious hotel, the same one where Olamide had announced his business empire's expansion just weeks earlier. Now, the ballroom was filled with reporters and cameras, all eager to hear from the woman who had taken down one of the city's most powerful figures. Tolu stood at the podium, her calm demeanor belying the storm that raged within her. She looked out at the sea of faces, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady. "I stand before you today not as a conqueror, but as someone who believes in justice, integrity, and the future of this city. What happened in the last few weeks, what you all witnessed, was not a victory for me. It was a victory for the people of Lagos. It was a victory for those who have long been silenced by corruption and greed." She paused, allowing her words to settle over the room. There were a few nods of agreement, but also skeptical looks. Tolu could sense the resistance in the room, the question on everyone's lips. "What now?" "I did not take down Kahind Olamide for personal gain," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the reporters. "I did it because the city I love deserves better. The people of Lagos deserve better than to live under the shadow of corruption, to be ruled by those who exploit their power for their own benefit. And if that means taking a stand, then I will." A flurry of questions erupted from the crowd. Tolu fielded each one with practiced grace, her answers measured, her tone unwavering. She was prepared for everything, but one question stopped her in her tracks. "Tolu, what happens now?" one reporter asked, her voice sharp. "You've taken down Olamide, but many believe there are still others like him out there. What will you do next?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Tolu's hand gripped the edge of the podium as she thought carefully. The truth was, she didn't know. The power vacuum left by Olamide's arrest was already being filled by others. More subtle players, quieter threats, but threats all the same. She had already lost so much, and the idea of continuing this fight exhausted her. But then, she thought of the women she had helped through her nonprofit, the faces of the people who still needed someone to stand up for them. She couldn't back down. "I will continue to fight," Tolu said, her voice firm. "There will always be those who seek to take advantage of power, but as long as I am here, I will make sure they do not succeed. This city deserves better, and I will ensure that it gets what it deserves." Her words were a declaration, one that she had to make not only for the city but for herself. She was no longer just a woman trying to survive. She was a force to be reckoned with. After the press conference, Talu returned to her office, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Ao and Diana had already left, having made their own preparations. But Talu felt restless, as if something was missing. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it, her eyes scanning the text. "We know what you did, and we won't let you win." The words sent a chill down her spine. She had known this was coming, the backlash from those who still had their hands in the shadows. But this felt different. This was no longer just about Olamide. It was about a network, an entire system of power that she had barely begun to uncover. Her fingers trembled as she typed a response. "You'll have to try harder." Talu set the phone down and took a deep breath. This was far from over. The fight against corruption, against the darkness that had claimed her city, was just beginning. The storm was far from over. But for the first time, Talu was ready for whatever came next.